You have 77,000 plus people creating on your platform. They've sold billions of dollars of products. What is something that the $1 million and up creators are doing that the sub-$1 million creators have not figured out?
The people who cross $1 million, there's almost always a personal connection. Brand is very creator focused, personality based. They've niched down, often a recurring revenue component. There's another thing that I think, if I've got ad revenue on YouTube, I'd be making about $3 to $8 RPM, but with digital products, $2,000 RPM. So it means with 6,700 followers, I've made well over $1 million.
How do you think AI is going to impact content creators in the next 5 years? Greg Smith, I haven't seen you in years. Thank you so much for carving out time.
Thanks. Appreciate it, Brad. Great to be here.
So you founded Thinkific, which now has the stats I pulled, correct me if I'm wrong, but 77,000 entrepreneurs are using it in almost 200 countries. Almost 190 million people have accessed the content on the platform. And it has generated close to $2 billion for the people using the platform.
Yeah, I think we're actually through, that's probably a little bit old. Like the nice thing about being part of a high growth company is you keep moving through those barriers. So we're well past the 2 billion now in terms of what people have generated on the platform, and the others have probably grown as well. There's only so many countries, but other than that, we keep growing.
Yep. There are probably a lot of countries that your goal is not to get Thinkific into them.
Yeah, generally the more the better. And the penetration in some of them is quite light. So there's still lots of opportunity to be more international than we are today.
And in terms of headcount, annual recurring revenue, et cetera, where are you guys at right now?
Yeah, we're about 280 people. We are at about 65 million US annual run rate in terms of revenue. And that was as of our last published quarter numbers at close of Q2 this year, 2024, and still growing and profitable. So it's been good.
So like 300 million Canadian?
Yeah, exactly. Yes. 65 million US, 300 million Canadian.
That's the conversion, something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
So I want to talk about the current platform because we have Easy Pay Direct serves the content creator, coach, consultant market really, really heavily. And so we're entrenched in it. And I think about it all the time. And I've got a bunch of specifics, but the origin story for you is also interesting because you started as an attorney. Can you give me some backdrop on what it was like to be an attorney and how the transition happened?
Yeah, I loved it. I went to business school, then I worked for a while, then I came back and went to law school. Got into one of the biggest firms in Canada, worked for a couple of them actually, and mostly did securities and capital markets law. So that's M&A, IPOs, all largely working with public companies, some private. And I loved the work, loved the people I was working with, loved the firms I was at, but had this entrepreneurial bug. And when I was in law school, I'd created an online course. I was teaching and tutoring in person and then took it into an online course. And that continued to grow. But the big thing was while I was practicing law, people were reaching out to me saying, we want to do what you've done. We want to build our own courses or digital products. We want to put them on our own website. We want to put it under a brand. We want to sell them. So conversion rates, payments are important parts of that. And so that was the impetus where I eventually kind of jumped ship and went full-time entrepreneur and went and started building Thinkific.
What was that transition like? I mean, it's one thing to have your own course. What was the catalyst that made you think, oh, I should build a unique platform for this? Because certainly at the time, there were ways to do it, right? Like the market for info products has existed for 50 years, right? Or well beyond. Yeah,
well, when I got started with my own course, it was 2005.
Oh, okay. So no, things didn't exist.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So, that's not 50 years ago, but so we did go looking for something off the shelf that would do what we do today, which is sort of your site, your brand, your content, your customers, your data, et cetera. We couldn't find anything. We looked at LMS, learning management systems, but they were more like, for universities in-house, like basically educating students in a school or employees in a company. We did look at marketplaces, Udemy, Coursera, Masterclass. They weren't around at the time, but there were other marketplaces. But the challenges then were kind of more of a royalty model where we give away our content, someone else sells it, controls it, takes most of the revenue from it and has that direct relationship with the customers. We really wanted to build our own thing under our own brand and kind of own and control our destiny. And so we initially just hacked together some payment stuff and website and a bunch of custom code to get it working. And then it wasn't until, say, 2012 when we had a lot of people reaching out to us saying, we want to do exactly what you're doing with your own course. Can you leverage that, whatever you've built for us? And what we built was a one-off solution for one website. It wouldn't scale to the tens of thousands of websites we support today. So that was really where we started building Thinkific, was all these people are asking us for this solution. Let's build it for them.
What was the value prop then? Because I know the value prop is different now, and I want to talk about kind of the differences over time. Similar, but I want to talk about the specific differences. But what was the pitch to people then?
The original idea was create and sell beautiful online courses, and that was sort of the original banner head. But then we did have a few sort of false positives and other starts. We tried doing kind of a marketplace model. We tried almost a masterclass model where we'd produce the content and sell it for people. We did a lot of bespoke websites where we went into bigger organizations and helped build it out for them. And then we kind of came back full circle once our tech had evolved and our team had grown a bit, and we were able to do it to kind of like a Shopify for digital products, where it was really about, you get your site, you sign up on your own, you put your card in, we give you a website, we give you the tools to build your digital products or course at the time, and then go and sell it. So really the original one is quite simple, is create your online course and then go sell it. And then there was some evolution that came from there.
So how far did that get you before you adjusted the model at all, like in terms of revenue, and how long did that take?
Yeah, that got us, it did get us past the $1 million mark, that very simple, very focused kind of one product. From there is where we started to open up to other opportunities. Really, it was in a similar way that the original idea came, where people started coming to us and saying, there's more we want here.
Yeah, I think that there's, a question that I like to ask people, and I'm laying the foundation for this because it's different for everybody and people tend to have opinions on it. But at what point do you chase new features for a product versus doubling down on what's working? And at what point do you add, marketing channels for an existing product line, or, add new product features? So how did you, what was the first sort of plateau at growth, if you had one, and how did you think about that transition?
So the first few years we were kind of struggling, right? Trying to figure everything out. And then we hit this magic moment about 3 years in, where all the graphs start going up and to the right, revenue's pouring in, growth is awesome. The cool thing there was we'd really hit this product market fit. We always knew what to build next because customers were just screaming for it. It was so obvious that we had some core unmet need of the customers, a job they were trying to get done that was fundamental to running the business they were running on Thinkific. And so it was pretty obvious what to build. And then, yeah, you're very right. We transitioned into this point, and I've heard it called, there's a good book called The Build Trap, that sort of, you get into this bit of a trap, I think, of just constantly adding new features. Because for a while, you're adding new features all the time because your audience desperately needs it just to meet their basic needs. And then you get into kind of this thing of just, well, let's just keep adding more. What's the next exciting thing you can do? And that was probably tied, not directly, but closely to some slowdowns in growth there. And so we had to kind of reset and think, okay, it's not just new features. It's actually potentially going back and solving existing problems way better with new technology. It's cleaning things up. It's improving the user experience, and investing in other ways to solve the problems we solve in better ways, rather than just putting on the next new feature. But you'll never have a shortage of asks of new features from your customers. The problem is it goes from 80% of your customers desperately need this thing to 10% think it's nice to have, and 1% are screaming about it, and then you listen to them. And I think that's a bit of a mistake. We certainly made that mistake.
Our internal mantra for the year is do less, better. And
that's a great one.
That's sort of, the product is stable. We know what we're offering, and it's tempting all the time to do fun new marketing things and product additions. And to your point, if you can improve on the core product, that may be more beneficial.
Yeah, I think even outside of software, a product is way better off being known as really amazing at one thing than mediocre at 50 things or even 3 things.
Yeah, I think that's a really good reminder, and it's a really hard thing for the typical entrepreneurial archetype. right? The person that wants
Yes.
variety,
Yeah.
that wants to create, that has a short attention span. And I don't self-identify as, I'm not like the totally spazzy ADD entrepreneur that needs to run around doing new things all the time. And, I'm a pretty focused operational executor, but I still like variety, and I'm still tempted by the shiny object.
We actually, early days, we had a shiny object. We called it the shiny object drawer. And it was where we put all the shiny objects so that we could kind of ignore them. It was actually a Google Drive doc. And we would just write up the idea. And then it'd be like, okay, cool idea. We'll come back to this when we have time for shiny objects, which of course was never. But I'm pretty sure we wrote up an idea for Tinder back then, before there was Tinder. Not that we would have been able to execute on that one. It wasn't our skill set. But it's funny. You kind of have to have that outlet to like let these things go so that you can really focus on what's important.
Do you have, this is a random question, but I find myself in situations like that. We have parking lots. We call them parking lots internally, which is, it's not
Same
quite
kind of
shiny.
concept.
Same kind of concept. Just all the garbage that let's park that for a little while. We'll come back to it, which like you said, you never come back to it.
Yeah.
Do you have specific space set aside for the creativity and the new feature set and the evolution to plan that stuff or think through it?
We do. Yeah. So we do this thing called Blue Sky Week. Every quarter we take a week, and initially it was just all of our engineering team, but lots of other teams now participate. And there's really no rules. It's sort of build, create, whatever you want. And so some really cool ideas come out of it. It does tend to be well informed by user needs though. So it's not, when we first launched it, I was a little worried people would be like inventing a new vacuum cleaner. And I'm like, what are we going to do with this? But it stayed pretty focused. Like it was really surprising to see that everyone on the team had a really good understanding of our user needs. And often some of the best ideas came out of this. I do think though, the ideation can be dangerous. Like I think it becomes really tempting, the shiny object stuff, when you're in your early stages and you haven't achieved, product market fit and success and growth, when things aren't going as well. But then also at a later stage, if growth starts to decline, that's when as a whole company, you can get really distracted, not necessarily by one little idea, but by, potentially really big distractions. And you see this, I think Jim Collins' book of like, the one where he talks about decline, he talks about this point. He doesn't use this language, but it's basically grasping at straws. And you're kind of on your way down and you start just firing off uncalibrated cannonballs at things and having them go wrong. And it's that temptation when things aren't going your way to go grasp at new things as opposed to go back to your base, remind yourself on what you're really, really good at and focus on that. So I'm always conscious, despite the fact that we have this innovation, that innovation has to tie back to what are we really good at and how are we meeting the needs of our customers rather than just random new ideas.
So I think about that in terms of product innovation and offerings quite often. But I also think about it in terms of marketing channels. Mm-hmm. What was the original marketing channel that you used? And well, let's start there. What was the original marketing channel for you? How'd you get to the first million and the first 10 million?
Yeah, I would love to say it was SEO and content because I love that. And I think, if I could go back, it would be more of that. We took longer. But when we hit it, the SEO and content was great. It kept our cost of acquisition down, scaled for a long period of time. But it was actually partnerships. So like essentially affiliate partnerships, finding people who are in the space, have an audience that is similar to who we're trying to reach, and they were willing to help us get in front of them, often for an affiliate fee. I remember one webinar in particular, I think it was with Marshawn Evans-Daniels, and she invited 60 people. She had a much bigger audience, but she invited 60 people to the webinar with us. 55 showed up and 20 purchased a 1-year plan with Thinkific. And so that was just a breakthrough moment of us of realizing that me on a webinar for an hour can drive that kind of result. And it really kicked off a whole bunch of growth for us. 20-30% revenue share at the time. So partners was a big one. And then we introduced more of the SEO and organic. And those were big focus areas that got us well through $1 million. And then sort of crossing the 10 million is where we did much more paid spend. But it's interesting because all the channels they fluctuate a bit, and it is, we do our best to get the, first touch, last touch, multi-touch attribution, figuring out where someone came from, but it's always quite complicated and never perfect. And one channel affects others. And so we're certainly nowhere near perfection on even understanding exactly where every lead came, right? Even like if I'm on this show now with you and someone listening says, oh, I want to go check out Thinkific, it's pretty hard for me to know for sure, even if I were to offer a coupon code or something, to sort of track back to like, this is where they came from.
Yeah, no question about it. I think, for people like me that are highly analytical and want to be very organized, that's infuriating.
Yeah. I heard of one company where they were doing so well on podcasts, but to validate it, they would shut off advertising in a particular, they're doing podcasts, they're doing television, they're doing radio. And the only way to really figure out some of this stuff was to stop doing it so they'd stop all their ads in a state for a while and then see what happened. And the differential was like, okay, when we turn it back on, we know what the differential is because there's no way to positively track it, so we can negatively track it.
God, that's awful. I mean, my approach is just like, do more things. And if you see everything raised, that's good. But it's not an analytical approach.
Yeah. And I think that works when everything's really efficient, or like we went through a long phase where, our metrics were so healthy and so off the charts, beyond, what good looks like in terms of things like CAC to LTV or LTV to CAC, where you're spending $1 to acquire a customer and you're getting $20 in return. And so really, really healthy things. And that allowed a lot more flexibility in spend and do all the things. But as things tighten up and you scale bigger, you do get to this point where I found we have had to be more efficient and more ruthless about each channel and even the campaigns within the channels being more profitable.
Is that because of margin compression, because you're making less per customer, or is it because of saturation, or what is that about?
It's not margin compression. So it's partly just more scale, partly some changes in that we went through when you're early days, I think growing from that like 0 to 5 or 10 million, there is opportunity to grow at metrics that don't make sense. Like they can be so good, but that rarely continues into the 20, 30, 60 plus $1 million range. And so you do have to get more measured and efficient with things as you get through that. But honestly, I don't know exactly all the reasons why. I mean, you can look at macro factors. Obviously, COVID was a big boon for us, and then post-COVID was slower, but still growing. So, part of it was just in 2020, we were at one point, we were doing 150% year over year growth at a pretty good scale. And then, the year after it was half that. And so figuring out, if it's come down so much, suddenly your marketing channels naturally are less efficient because you're acquiring less for the same spend or sometimes more.
Did you think about the systemic approach to adding channels, or were you just kind of throwing shit at the wall the whole time and seeing what was going to work?
Definitely tried sort of to think about the systemic approach, but a lot of it was just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what stuck. We'd do a partner webinar and say, oh, that worked, let's do more of that. And then we'd write some blog posts and do some YouTube videos and say, oh, that worked, let's try more of that. So we'd go to an event, speak at an event, and we'd get a bunch of leads from that and say, let's do more of that. But it wasn't as precise as I'd love to say it was. It was trying a lot of things and just going with what worked.
Yeah, I guess, for me, I'm always kind of thinking about where those things happen in the growth of a company, because when you're first figuring out how to get product market fit, you're doing everything, right? You've got a million hats that you're wearing. You're trying whatever you can. You're seeing what fits. You're trying to figure out the product that's going to make sense, whether it's software or something else. And as things start to stabilize, the approach changes for people. How did your specific role change? What are your responsibilities as a CEO today?
Yeah, I mean, it's radically different. It changes. I think, every 6 months, I'm almost applying for a new job. So I've got to really level up in terms of a lot of reading and studying and even courses to continue to grow and figure out what my new role is. Today, it's largely how do I ensure my executive leadership team is supported and have everything they need to excel, and make sure I have the right executive leadership team. It's some component of investor relations, being a public company, managing all the things that go with the stock market, and a board of directors. And I love that because there's a huge element there of just going out and meeting with very smart analytical investors and having them provide feedback gives a lot of good ideas and maybe points out weak points or strengths that you hadn't considered, or even acquisitions we could make. There's an element of partnership building and exploring things like buying other companies that is part of my role now. And then there's a huge element that I just two big elements that I refuse to give up, which is talking to customers a ton and talking to our team and working on culture.
Culture, customers, money, investor relations.
And exec team.
Also mentioned was partnerships.
Yeah. And there's some elements of product in there as well. So still fairly, it's changing a bit now because I've got an amazing executive who's taking a lot more of it on, but up until very recently, I've been very closely tied to product and still involved in that to some extent.
Is that because you like the partnership and the product side of things? Because if you have a great executive doing the product.
Partly because I love it, partly because I can add value there in terms of understanding our customers and bringing some of that to it. But again, I think this is an area that's currently evolving because I now have an executive who's kind of owning this. But a lot of it is, it's an area of passion and some expertise, I would like to think there. In terms of being good at it. But we kind of call it giving away your Legos here. Even though you enjoy playing with them, there comes a point where you got to give away your Legos and have someone who's better at playing with them than you take those on. So I've had to do a lot of that over the years.
I'm going to clip that one for sure. That's great. Are these your responsibilities because as you grew, you have a board that is telling you these are the things you should be focused on? Or did you figure this out on your own? Or how does that work for you?
Yeah, board, not so much on what are my responsibilities. They certainly have been great at maybe pointing out a weak point in company or market or idea that I hadn't seen. I've certainly brought things and them said, you realize this could put the company at risk. And I'm like, right. And they're like, you're doing great. You don't need to put the company at risk. I'm like, yeah, okay, good idea. This is like a shiny object that could really submarine us. So let's not do that. And just, exploring strategically opportunities. Board's actually been helpful even on recruiting, have done great stuff there. But in terms of the development of where I spend my time, it is much more evolving naturally with the needs of the company and constantly trying to find the most exceptional people. Like probably the most important thing I can do is make sure that we have the most exceptional people, the right people in the right seats on the bus, A players in super important seats. And as long as I'm doing that, then that almost requires me to give up Legos for them to take those things on. And that redefines my role constantly because you bring in someone who can now take over all of R&D and I don't have to be as involved in there and I can't be as involved in there because otherwise I'm, now it's mom and dad managing and people get mixed direction from two different leaders.
Yeah. Well, I clearly have no linear approach to this conversation at all, which I'm totally okay with.
Yeah.
Why did you choose to go public?
Great. Yeah, no, it's a good question. One of the big reasons initially was we can get more exposure. And certainly our press releases go farther. Our brand goes farther. There is more recognition. There's articles written about us far more frequently. You can look us up on Yahoo Finance and Apple stocks and all that kind of stuff. It brings a level of trust with customers. Obviously, we raised $180 million with it. So that was a nice benefit as well. And we did that at a pretty ridiculous, billion-dollar valuation. And so that was a good time to go public. The window was open. And I was lucky in that, my CFO had a background in public companies. I have a background with public companies in that I was a securities lawyer. So I took companies public prior as a lawyer. So when the opportunity came up, it seemed like the right thing to do. And I think it has been quite beneficial for us in terms of creating a lot of opportunity.
What's the worst thing about being a public company?
Yeah. Well, so one of the other reasons and a good thing that can be a bad thing too is you've got liquid shares, right? So every single person who's ever worked for Thinkific has had equity in Thinkific. And so that's great. And going public means that it's actually liquid. They could use it to, sell some stock, get a mortgage, that kind of thing, or put a down payment down or buy a house. But the downside is your stock moves with the stock market. And so a lot of times our stock will be up or down. And I'm like, we haven't done anything. We haven't announced anything. It's just down because interest rates are up, right? Or it's up because interest rates are down or because tech is booming or because tech is not doing as well. So that is one thing that does create some distraction. And certainly there's a cost, financial and time-wise, to having, spending a lot on insurance. Which you need as a public company, having a board, cost of board, time of managing the board. And there are benefits to all these things, but there's costs here for sure in terms of managing all of this. So it does add a whole nother almost department to your company to have to deal with all of this.
Did you have a board before you went public?
We did, but it was me, my brother, Fraser and Jay. So, Fraser and Jay being our early VC investors. and then my brother, who was a co-founder with me. So it was, 4 friends getting together once a week to kind of chat through challenges in the business. It's much more kind of formal now. We have independent directors who I don't have a prior relationship with, and they've, they haven't grown up with the company. So it's quite different now.
What's the best thing about being public?
I mean, a lot of the reasons we went public materialized. So we do get more exposure. We do build more trust being a public company. I've certainly learned a lot. We raised, like I said, 180 million. It opens the door. If we needed, let's say we wanted to buy a company for $50 million tomorrow, there is a market we could go raise money from very quickly. Existing investors and the liquidity there for the stock for all existing investors. And I also kind of like the fact that now all of our numbers are public, right? Like you asked me about revenue. That's something I might have been a bit cagey to answer 5 years ago. But now I can say, oh yeah, we're at 65 million as our last recorded quarter. It's different today, obviously, and we'll report again at the end of Q3. But just having that stuff out there, there is even some transparency brand building that comes with it, of people being aware of, how well you're doing and things like that.
Could be a scary level of accountability.
Yeah, sometimes it certainly is. And I'd say there's a downside that, and this is typical of public companies, it can occasionally create short-term focus because you kind of have to hit the quarter. The results you deliver each quarter are really important, and lots of people are scrutinizing and analyzing them, and there can be an impact on share price if you have a bad quarter. But I've really tried to kind of, managing that, really focus on the long-term growth and not focus on short-term at the expense of long-term, but focus on the long-term while trying to manage the short-term.
So you mentioned partnerships. And originally partnerships when you started were sort of influencer relationships, affiliates, JVs. How did that change over time? So that was 0 to $1 million. Now at 50 or 60 million, what do partnerships look like for you?
Yeah, we still do lots of that, but definitely that's a Lego I'm not as involved in. Much more involved in the bigger partnerships. So, in particular, one I've been working on is with Spotify. So now you can build your course with Thinkific and publish it into Spotify and sell it on Spotify, specifically in the UK today, but the hope is it'll roll out broader beyond that. But that was a year in the making, lots of flights and dinners and conversations with the awesome team at Spotify. But, I felt like I was kind of uniquely positioned to be a part of those conversations and help make that happen. It wasn't just me, lots on the team kind of helped with that. But it's those kind of partnerships I'm, more interested in looking at. And then that, and occasionally talking to potential, integration partners where there's an acquisition opportunity for us, maybe some product gap that we have that could be of real value to our customers. We can see someone is doing well with it in the space. Maybe we're integrated and partnered with them first, and then there's an acquisition opportunity there.
So tell me about the dynamics of the Spotify partnership and where the value is for both sides.
Yeah, so the simple is people create the course with Thinkific, publish to Spotify through our integration. Spotify takes care of selling it and bringing in the students to it. And then there's a revenue share where potentially if it's sold through an Apple device, Apple gets some, Spotify gets some, Thinkific gets some, Creator gets some, Creator getting the biggest chunk, obviously. The nice thing about working with them is they're very aligned with our values of sort of creator first and really focus on the creator and rewarding them. So we've done everything we can to kind of push as much of the value to the creator as possible. And the cool thing is they get exposure right now in the UK to, 40 million users there and potentially to 600 million Spotify users in the future.
Got it. Okay, so Spotify is functionally serving some sort of ad to their users about a course from Thinkific that might be relevant based on whatever, things they can track internally. And then the payment is actually happening through Apple's payment mechanisms.
Most of it is still happening on the desktop app as opposed to in the Apple, in the device, because that's where you buy, I think, most of your, say, Spotify subscriptions. And we're still running experiments with them on how exactly is this something that's going to be included, like in a subscription. But essentially, it's on par with, you've got music, audiobooks, podcasts, and now courses. And so, in the UK, at least, when you go into the app, you'll see courses at the top, and then audiobooks, podcasts, and then courses. And so you can click into that and see what courses are available. And I think we're even experimenting with including with different ways of pricing it and including it and things like that.
How do you think about course creation in the future and these giant companies facilitating stuff like that? Do you think that that's going to erode the market for course creation platforms?
Well, I mean, there's lots of ways we've evolved. I think even over time, you mentioned the sort of starting and evolution. One was we're not just courses; we do all sorts of digital products. Another was getting into actually working with bigger companies, even as clients. But specifically on the larger companies like Spotify, I see it more as a distribution network. So I think what it does is it expands the reach of the individual creator, where before this partnership and things like this that we're doing, you've got to create your own content or your own digital products. You've got to go build your audience on a social network. Then you've got to figure out how to capture those leads and sell to them. What this allows you to do is you can do all of that, which lets you own your brand. And I think it's still really important to do that business model. And we can talk about why financially that's typically really beneficial to creators, even with low follower counts. But this also gives you this channel where someone can promote your products for you to an existing audience that they have, typically at a lower cost because they already own the audience and they can put it in front of them. So I think what it really does is it expands the reach. So if anything, I think it increases the opportunity for creators to reach more people.
Yeah, I see that as the short term for sure. Like the way you just described it seems very clear that from a distribution perspective, that makes tons of sense. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking more, we're starting to see the major content platforms allow monetization of content for creators.
Yeah.
And in some ways it's a little disturbing, but it makes sense too, right? It's a one place to go where the audience is already. And so the creator gets the opportunity to monetize where the audience already is. Certainly part of the playbook for Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google, Facebook is to integrate new products once they're doing well and just create them themselves. Mm-hmm. Do you look at them as potential competition down the road or a potential acquirer down the road?
Yeah, certainly there's some of all three, right? Competition, acquirer, but also just partner in that. When you look at, say, YouTube, for example, which is where a lot of this is happening, the monetization and a lot of the audience and a lot of the creators, especially when they're more long form or education focused, or they're sharing something of knowledge base, which is where we really focus. It's a much tighter distribution in that you've got the top 1 or 2% of creators on YouTube making 90% of the wealth. And that's because whenever you have one platform of, not like Thinkific platform, but a platform like a YouTube where it's content distribution, social network, call it. By its very nature, they have to have an algorithm where they route their end users to the highest quality, best content, best performing content, which naturally sways all of the follower count and revenue to the top end. And so you get the rich get richer, and there's just a few of them. And it's really hard, say, through ads or other means to make a decent living with, say, 10,000 fans or followers on a YouTube, for example. And so I think there's always room for us because we give people an opportunity. Like I've seen people make my YouTube channel, for example, I've got 6,700,000 followers, and I make on that one about $2,000 per 1,000 views. So if you do so my revenue per 1,000 views, which is a key metric for creators, right? 2,000 RPM revenue per 1,000 views. If I've got ad revenue on YouTube, I'd be making about $3 to $8 RPM. If I've got brand sponsorships, maybe $50 RPM. But with digital products, courses specifically for me, $2,000 RPM. So it means with 6,700 followers, I've made well over $1 million from that channel. So it's a fundamentally different arrangement with a much broader distribution of wealth. And essentially you can have a middle class of creators because they own their own product that they're selling, as opposed to doing, and they own their own brand and their own site. So they can bring people in and then potentially cross-sell other products, have upsells, have a community that people are part of. And I know some of these things you can do on the network, but you're still tied to that algorithm, right? So I think that's where the opportunity for us to continue to live is super exciting.
So I think what I heard was the core monetization strategy through something like YouTube, at least as a platform, is monetizing through ads. And then you're getting paid a nominal amount per view for the ads that run, which, by the way, might conflict with your product that you're selling or who you are because you don't get to pick that versus or you go to getting a sponsor for the channel where you're pushing somebody else's product and you're getting paid more to do that. And those typically are little bursts, and maybe you have something with a short contract. But the way to make money right now is monetizing through courses. And so using YouTube as a traffic source and then selling courses on the back end is how you get to $2,000 per 1,000 views with your YouTube channel. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Do you think that YouTube or others will integrate a full course platform at some point to allow them to facilitate the experience?
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, they do have paid content. They are experimenting more and more with things like paid communities. I think the trade-off, though, is as long as your business lives on someone else's owned property, they have different motivations. So with a tool like Thinkific, at our core, everything is it's your site, your brand, your business, your customers, your everything, your data, right? And so you own the customer relationship. You've built that. You can cross-sell other products. You can reach out to them, in any way that you want. And we're not in there messing with that. We don't have a direct relationship with that end user. Whereas with a social network like YouTube, their end customer, fundamentally is not the creator, right? It's the viewer. So they focus more on the viewer. And so that skews a lot of the dynamics. And so it means if you build around that, you are always at risk of, them deprecating the entire, courses or communities thing and saying, oh, it's not making enough money for us from our core customer who's not you, it's the viewer. You're at risk of the algorithm and them just deciding to point all of your traffic at someone else. You're at risk of advertisements from competitors. There's a whole bunch of things that affect you there that I find. I'm not saying don't use it. I encourage everyone we work with definitely use the platforms because it's a massive source of exposure. Just don't be entirely tied to it, right? Own your brand, have a place where you can pull people to for maybe your flagship products, maybe your flagship experience, and you can really own that experience because then no matter what happens on the platforms, on the social networks, you've got your own platform where you can build that. And that's kind of where we meet our niche need there.
Yeah, I look at Amazon very similarly for e-commerce brands. You probably want to play there. You probably need to play there. But man, if you don't have an e-com store set up separately in addition to your Amazon store, you are waiting for that to explode.
Well, I mean, how many Amazon products has Amazon just decided, oh, hey, paper plates do really well. We'll make our own, branded paper plate brand or 50 of them, right? They're like, I think they're auto-generated names, these brands that you see on there, but they've wiped out anyone who was previously doing well with that. And the same thing can happen on the social. And I don't want to get, negative here. I think these platforms are amazing. They've helped build the whole creator economy. It's awesome. And I'd love to partner with them more. But I think it's both, right? I think it's having both is necessary, a place to build the audience and then separately a place where you get to really own and control and interact with more directly.
Don't get me wrong. Almost like 90% of my goods are purchased from Amazon. As a consumer, I fucking love the platform. Also, there's a pretty significant delineation here because Amazon's pretty gangster with this. Like they will take your product, make their own white labeled version, and then they will just outrank you. They will just put their product as the top spot. YouTube doesn't have the same motivations. And so when you look at incentives and why they do things, you pointed this out with YouTube, it's to the end consumer and it's really based around entertainment. They're not trying to show people the best information. They're trying to show people the information that other people clicked on and viewed the longest.
Yeah.
And that is not necessarily the best information, as I think we should all know and agree on.
Right. A thumbs down counts just as much as a thumbs up on YouTube in terms of engagement, right? But I think part of that is a factor of where their business model sits today. Because they're primarily ad driven today, it's entertainment and it's volume of viewership, right? Their BHAG, Big Hairy Audacious goal at one point was, the billion hours watched in a day or whatever. That's because of follow the money, right? That's where their current motivation lies. But if their motivation starts to shift, that selling these digital products, the memberships, the courses they're starting to allow people to offer on their side is the primary revenue model, you will see that shift to more of an Amazon approach of, hey, look, Brad's course on whatever you're teaching is the best in this category. We're gonna bump him to the very top, and all your competitors potentially aren't as focused, or potentially worse. Let's hire someone to go teach this, I don't know, corporate finance topic, whatever you're teaching, and we'll bump our own to the top. Right now we have our own product because we don't have to do the revenue share at that point. So I think that's the potential. I'm forecasting too much into the future there, but I think that's the potential risk where it's always important. Really, the reality is you don't know what the motivations will be in the future, and so there's always a benefit of owning your own storefront, and having a place where you can kind of have that direct interaction. But again, it's an and, not an or. I think you need both.
Yeah. Well, forecasting into the future too far is what's so much fun is making the guesses with no information,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that, I look at pretty much everything in business and life from the perspective of what's the absolute best, what's the absolute worst case scenario, recognize neither are actually likely to happen, and then plan about a step in and say, what's the likely best, what's the likely worst? And I think it's not a stretch at all to say the likely worst is that the algorithm's going to change, and you're going to be impacted negatively if you have one traffic source, which for a lot of people is one social channel. So I love that. Well, let's talk about, I have a million questions for you because software development is a horrible pain in the ass, and I have lots of questions around that.
I love it. But on the forecasting, just one thing I heard that I thought was really brilliant. This is not from me, but it was, it's really hard to forecast what's going to change. It's a lot easier to figure out what's going to stay the same. And you can build a strategy around what will stay the same. And so when you look at status quo today and you figure out, look, these are not going to change, about your business, about your customers' needs and wants and the industry, that can be a great thing to build a strategy around because you can rely on it. Whereas things that it might change this way, certainly a lot riskier.
What's not going to change with content creators in the next 10 years?
I think one of the things is they are going to continue to be looking to monetize, right? So in some form or another, I think knowledge sharing and content sharing, the people doing it and what's created this entire creator economy, it's the second half of the 2-word name is the economy. It's the monetization. So that desire to monetize content is what drives a lot of people to do it. Yes, we all are driven many of us are driven by having a positive impact and sharing our message with others. And there will be a few who would continue to do it just for that. But the whole industry, I think, is driven by this desire to monetize. So that's one of many needs that I think we can rely on not changing.
You have 77,000 plus people creating on your platform. They've sold billions of dollars of products. So you have lots of data on this. What is something that the $1 million and up creators are doing that the sub $1 million creators or a newbie have not figured out or are not doing?
Yeah, there's a few things, and it can vary. Obviously, creator, I'm always surprised. People often ask, what's the topic that I should teach that'll do the best? And I've seen success in everything from hula hooping to corporate finance or mining to sex education. So it's not so much the topic. I think that when you see people who've really scaled up, there's an element of, they've niched down often. And then potentially they can expand or branch out from there at certain levels. Like when I see people cross 10 million, usually at that point, they're actually starting to branch back out. But early on, they kind of stay really narrow and focused in what they're good at. There is often a recurring revenue component. And so as opposed to just the one-off launches one time, even at, $1,000 fee or something like that, usually having a recurring revenue component allows people to scale a lot bigger because you're not always searching for, your month doesn't start with $0, right? Your month starts with everyone who's already subscribed. There's another thing that I think it does vary is like what the brand is and the personal connection. I see the people who cross 1 million, there's almost always a personal connection. The brand is very creator focused, individual, personality based. And then there's a point where I start to see them try and branch out. And I don't know if it's like a survival mechanism of like, I can't do this all myself anymore. But I think part of it is recognizing you can scale more when you have potentially other faces, you can do more with it. When I started my online course, it was actually under the brand. I didn't do anything like Greg's LSAT. It was under AlphaScore. And my whole intent was like, I want to be on par with Kaplan and some of these other creators that are big brands with big teams. And even though it's just me and my brother, like this is going to be a bigger brand. And I don't know if that helped or hurt, but most of the people I see, they start building under an individual brand, a personality, people associate with them. And I think that really does help with the growth. And then there comes a point where they do, again, past the $1 million mark as a creator, where they start to expand a bit. Maybe they have other creators come in, or they hire a team that is doing more of it, and it becomes less about their individual brand. Although I have seen some scale it all the way with just the individual brand. But I think that the breaking it apart, or having a brand that's bigger than just you, also it allows things like taking investment or potentially exiting or selling or things like that beyond you.
I mean, we're talking about the face of the brand, I think is what I heard. Is there's I kind of heard two things. Initially, when you were talking, I was thinking authenticity in the brand, meaning that whatever the creator is talking about is actually close to them and personal to them. That was initially what I heard. And then we went into kind of having a face on the brand, and that being the brand versus having an institutional construct, right? Having some like Beyond a Million versus the podcast of Brad Weimert, for example.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think it's a bit of both, right? Part of the reason the face of the brand works is because you get that authenticity, but you can scale that. If it was you and me doing a show together or a business together, you could have Brad being authentic and Greg being authentic and under a bigger brand, right?
Off the top, I can think of, Diary of a CEO and Alex Hormozy. And it's Alex's name that has been his brand. And now he has a company that he's pulled to that. And then Stephen Bartlett is Diary of a CEO. And that's what he's been pushing. And both work. But I would think, and you might have the data behind this, but I would think that it would be much more difficult to scale the brand side of it on the first part as opposed to the personal brand.
Yeah, I think it's easier to start scaling the personal brand, but there's a point where it flips, and it's probably easier to scale the brand. Nobody's going to be, I don't think you're going to see the same level of success of like Brad's sugary drink or versus Coca-Cola, right? And you get the generational thing, but even taking investment, right? At some point, if people are looking for an exit, liquidity, investment, these things can be easier if you can go beyond just the individual brand. But it's a great place to start and scale up. And I think it's one of those transitions that can happen at scale.
How do you think AI is going to impact content creators in the next 5 years?
Oh, so many ways. But good ways, really good ways. I'm not as worried about the replacement element. I actually think that it's so exciting what it is doing already and can continue to do. I mean, one of the things that AI is just so built for and so good at is consuming content and then producing more content with it. And so if you've got someone on your team, your AI, who can consume what you're producing and then augment, improve, potentially, distribute, but syndicate in that, you put this podcast into it and it pumps out things like blog posts and additional videos or snippets, or really trains a model that can then talk to your customers with your voice and potentially my voice because I'm on your show. I think this is ridiculously powerful, and we're just getting started. I do see in the space so far, largely the use case is sort of repurposed GPT, right? Like people are kind of injecting GPT into products where it's largely what it's doing is it's saving you the trip over to GPT to do the work for you. And instead it's embedded in the product. And so we're really looking at how do we go a step beyond and kind of leverage that as the base layer, but do a lot more with it. But the crazy thing is the models are evolving so fast, you almost don't want to get too far ahead of them. One of the first ideas we had when GPT kind of hit the thing in January, whatever, a year and a half ago was, is it 2.5 years? I don't know. When they first came out or was really starting to get going was, let's do this to ingest all of a creator's content and then create a personality out of AI that they can use to talk to customers. Well, fast forward 6 months from that point, and GPT is releasing the ability to build your own GPTs. So part of it is just making sure what we're trying to do is making sure we are able to constantly leverage the latest updates, and then staying at the head of the curve in terms of the only competitive advantage I see here, which is the data pool.
which is the data pool?
Yeah, I think it's because it's moving so quickly and it's pretty easy to work with in terms of a developer perspective. I think one of the core competitive advantages you can have is the data pool. And so as a creator, you kind of own your own data pool of even just your viewpoints and content and all of that stuff. But as a company like Thinkific, while we don't own it because our customers do, we can tap into and leverage in really helpful ways for individual creators the greater pool that we have. So one thing we definitely will not do is take one creator's content and then help produce, say, a course for someone else using their knowledge. We won't cross that line. But what we can do is look at the billions of pieces of information we have across that and use it to help an individual creator without swapping knowledge across that line. But then when they input what they're good at, we can really level them up.
What are the AI features that you've integrated into Thinkific so far, and what's on the roadmap?
Yeah, a bunch of different ways. One is we're working with, so we actually, about a year ago, we said, what would it take to disrupt Thinkific from a garage? And we focused on social, mobile, and AI. And we built a company and a product called The Leap, theleap.co. And it's scaled really rapidly, got a pretty amazing kind of visitor count, well over 1 million in terms of people coming on a recurring basis. But also we built an AI-based product there that's focused on social and mobile. So it's almost like a really streamlined version of Thinkific where you can build products, all sorts of digital products, not course focused at all, but all sorts of very simple digital products, leveraging AI to get a storefront up and running and get things selling there. So that's been spectacular success and just came out of beta and is starting to go. So that whole thing kind of operates on AI in terms of ingesting your content brand and then helping you produce storefront and products to sell within it. And we're doing a bunch of other stuff on the Thinkific side as well.
Okay. I have a bunch of questions I want to ask you, but I think some of them are more personal, so I'm going to save them.
Yeah. I don't mind the personal ones, but you can always edit if it's too personal, but I'm generally a pretty open person. So
it's more about things that I need internally as the company. Well, okay. I'll ask you. So we're, and this is a totally random one, but we're adding a whole bunch of people to the team right now. And part of that is we're heavy on training, obviously. And our training is extensive. Inside the walls of EasyPay Direct, the people that work here understand payments so much better than the industry at large, like just wildly different level of education inside the company. But to do that, the training has to be killer.
Right.
The platforms that we use, you mentioned this earlier, you mentioned LMS, which is Learning Management System. I noticed that Thinkific rolled out an LMS. It has an element, and maybe you don't look at it that way, but it has an element that's designed to create trainings for enterprise or for businesses. Mm-hmm. I'll ask you two questions on that. The first, I kind of alluded to earlier, but how far down the path, like in terms of revenue, et cetera, did you go before you decided, hey, you know what? We're going to serve enterprise businesses to have courses for their employees for training? That's number one. And number two is, how does the layout of that differ from the product that already existed inside of Thinkific?
That was one of the ways that we evolved, certainly. So when we first got started, it was like kind of creators like me producing courses. And then we evolved in one way was going to all digital products. And another way was this, what we call Plus, which was, a higher price point for a higher service offering to serve some of these larger companies. I wouldn't say we're really targeting true enterprise. Like we're more like SMB up to say, 20 to 1,000 employees. And the primary use case usually isn't the educate employees. People definitely use us for that. But primary use cases is more customer education where they're either monetizing it. So they're taking their knowledge as a company and selling it to customers, or they're training their customers for free alongside existing product and service. Those are the two biggest use cases. Often they'll use us for that and more, including internal, because once you're building with one system, it's easy to do it. And yeah, I don't, the LMS thing, that was when we were first getting started, because the conventional LMS, especially back then, was very focused on something was not at all what we wanted to do, and they couldn't meet our needs. But we are a learning management system, right? So technically anything where you put learning content, manage it, and then deliver it to people is an LMS. I just find that as a creator, most of them don't even know the word, let alone really what it all means. And so it's more like, hey, we're a course platform, or we're at more of a digital product platform, storefront, and e-commerce business for you, a way for you to monetize your content and followers. And so, yeah, that was definitely one evolution. We were probably 15, 20 million in revenue when we launched that, grew it really rapidly to 10 million. And now it's, I think it's about 25% of our business. So at 65 million US in revenue, it's about 25% of that, and growing at, I think about 30% year over year. So really solid growth rate there. So that's definitely been a big win. And it plays nicely because it just means like our larger customers have a place to land and that has much higher level of service. And then to your question from the software front, when we first started, it was, we kind of followed the playbook of Shopify Plus very similarly. Like it was the same product at a higher price point with a higher level of service. And then since then, we've added more feature set that is available just there, that is really about serving the needs of those larger customers that our smaller customers just don't need. And so we put the stuff that the bigger customers definitely need, and the smaller ones don't, up on that higher price point, and that helps create that plus business. It's also got a different go-to-market because we have a sales team there, whereas we don't have a sales team on the bottom end.
That's awesome. So that was going to be one of the questions is if you had separate sales mechanisms. And I would imagine that the LTV for the small business product is higher than the course creator LTV.
Yeah. The average price point for someone on our sort of what we call self-serve core business is about $99 a month. You can get in lower, higher, and the average price point on the plus side is sort of $2,000 a month and up, depending on what you're using and levels of service and things. So it is pretty significantly different, which allows us to have a sales team there and different levels of account management, things like that.
Because you're charging per seat in the business side of things?
It's not really per seat. It's more like volume of usage, sites, things like that, like the volume of usage that you've got overall, and a few different things that we build into it there. But just people have bigger needs and we meet those needs. And so there's a higher price point that comes with it.
Helpful. You did a bunch of things from an educational perspective in college that I think are some of the best things you can do to learn business. So obviously studying business, but then also an attorney. Those two things, going through those two paths in school, help you get a grip on, I don't think early stages of business, but they help you get a grip on later stages of business, which is the M&A, the financial side of things, larger transactions, et cetera. School, college, I think is going out of style, if it hasn't gone out of style entirely already.
Yeah. Fair enough.
What advice would you give a 25-year-old entrepreneur, or what advice would you give a 20-year-old entrepreneur today?
Yeah. I mean, oh man, I loved going to school. I loved university, partly because I had a lot of fun, right? And so not just
they
the
have
learning
cameras
side.
now.
They have cameras there now. Yeah. No, I had a great time, made tons of friends, people I'm still close friends with to this day. And so there is an element of learning that happened there that was very much outside the classroom, but also learned a lot in the classroom. I don't think you need to, right? I don't think it's necessary to be an entrepreneur. Like most of this stuff can be learned in online courses, right? Or from, there are better instructors at corporate finance online teaching on Thinkific today than I got when I was going through school, right? So I had some instructors who were amazing and others who definitely weren't. And so I think you can get a lot of the stuff outside, but there is a discipline element of some of this self-taught. But there's also, I love the learning online in particular because it's just in time versus just in case, right? When you go through school, everything is, you're going to spend 4 years doing this just in case it's useful at some point in the future. And some of it will be out of date at that point. Whereas like, today I'm studying this product development framework that is a just in time, like we need this now, we're going to start implementing it. I'm getting caught up on it. And so there is that element that I think can be so much better, but the trade-off is the motivation piece, right? When you've paid tuition, you live on campus and you have class, you're much more likely to kind of go and study and get these things done. And so you have to kind of be self-motivated to make that trade-off. So there's nothing wrong with the self-taught, but there's that trade-off. There's also the social piece too, which I think you have to, there's lots of other avenues you can find there. But I love school. Certainly don't think it's necessary, but it has some benefits for sure.
What advice do you have for people that have a SaaS company that are at $1 million in ARR?
Stay really focused, really stay close to your customer, live and breathe and spend time with them, even the ones that are frustrating or frustrated, and stay very close to the product and really focus on meeting needs of customers, right? Getting down to what are they trying to achieve. And I think the more you set success for you in alignment with success with customer, the better you do, right? I think when you start to deviate of like, we need to make money versus how do we help our customers, that's where things can go sideways, especially as you get up into the millions in revenue. And then the other one is just at every stage of company, it's the right people in the right seats is the most important thing.
What advice do you have for a new content creator or coach?
Don't worry about the perfectionism and the procrastination, like just get something shipped this month, right? When I started building my first online course, I was going to take probably a year to build an 80-hour course because that's what one of our competitors had. And my brother gave me the best advice. He's like, we're going to launch in 30 days. I've got the launch button here. And so whatever you've built by then is going live. So do what you can. And I built this kind of mini course that went out and we had this bet whether anyone would buy it. They did. They liked it. And then we kept building more. And I eventually got up to much bigger products. You don't need to go 80 hours. That's crazy. It was just the industry I was in. But I think it's just, get over yourself and your fear of getting stuff out there. Get something out there that has problems with it and needs feedback, and get feedback from real people as fast as you can.
I love that. Earlier today, I was talking to a very good friend of mine. He goes by Jay Hobbs. He's a musician. And he, we had the normal bullshit preamble in our conversation. Hey, how's it going? What are you doing? And I was like, I'm fucking busy. Like I'm overwhelmed. I'm busy. And he was like, yeah, I'm really busy too. And I was like, are you though? And he said, yeah, today is he said, it's my favorite day. I just make music all day. And I was like, so does that feel busy to you? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, how? Like you're just by yourself creating music. There's no real deadlines to anything. And he said, yeah, there are. I have deadlines on everything. And I said, it's self-imposed. And he said, yeah, I have goals that I'm setting and deadlines that I'm going to get them out by. And I thought that is a beautiful lesson, because if you don't create the deadline yourself and commit to getting it out, you do this perfectionism thing where you just drag it out for fucking ever and never launch.
Yeah. And I love to hear that, especially from artists, because there's a great book on some of this stuff called The War of Art. Not the art of war, but the war of art. So not Sun Tzu, but the war of art.
Is it Pressfield? Pressler?
Yeah. That sounds about right. But the summary, as I understand it, is like, it's not about waiting for inspiration to strike you and being artistic when you feel like it. And I think this goes especially for creators. It's about having that dedicated work time every day and putting it in. And eventually genius comes out of that through like dedication and repetition and consistency, not from just waiting around to get an epiphany in the shower. Greg
Smith, it has been awesome. I'm going to pick your brain on software as well, but I think it's too nerdy for the rest of the audience.
Now you're going to get comments saying, wait, we want to hear.
I hope so. Then I'll harass you for a round two.
Happy to. Yeah.
Is there anywhere you want to point people to learn more about yourself or about Thinkific, et cetera?
Thinkific.com is sort of like all my channels sort of point back to there. TheLeap.co is the other sort of AI product that's totally worth checking out, especially if you want to get up and running today and, super fast. And I'm on LinkedIn is probably the best place to get me. Just, personally.
I love it. Thanks so much, man. It's great to see you.
Right. Thanks, Brad. You too.